A delay in the decision to ban TikTok from Australian government devices could be down to a risk of reigniting tensions with Beijing. According to the Australian senior officials in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet cautioned, it might be interpreted as targeting Chinese businesses. While other countries, including the US and UK, have implemented government bans of the app, the Prime Minister's office has been advised to take an agnostic approach. Tanya Plibersek, Labor frontbencher, says she doesn't think a ban is necessary if personal devices are kept separate.
I don't think it's a big deal to have a separate phone to do this sort of communication. I think it's good to communicate with people on the platforms that they use most often. I think being able to talk to people about what the government's doing, what we're doing in the environment portfolio, it's a great opportunity to do that. I just don't want to have any potential compromising of my official data.
Joining me for more on this is Lee Hunter, General Manager of TikTok in Australia and New Zealand. Lee Hunter, thanks very much for your time. TikTok is a big tech company that does hoover up a lot of user information. Would you understand if it were banned on Australian government devices?
Hi, Tom. Look, I think the problem would be if we're just singled out by ourselves. I personally have no problem if we're looking at the breadth of social media applications and messaging applications. If they weren't to be on government devices, I think most Australians would agree it's a fair thing to expect our civil servants to be spending their time at their jobs and not looking at their social media. So I have no problem with that. It's where we get singled out unfairly, which I think is the real issue here.
Okay, so leaving aside what they should be doing in their day job, which, look, fair enough to comment on, but in your job with your hat on as TikTok boss, you're saying if TikTok is banned, other social media apps should be banned as well if the barrier there is privacy issues, essentially.
Let me give you an example. Earlier today, you had on the Shadow Minister, Karen Andrews, and she was talking a lot about inaccuracies around TikTok. And I think that's an example of where we get unfairly targeted, not rooted in evidence or facts. She's talking about things like we collect facial and voice information to identify people. Not true. We collect GPS data. Not true. We collect keystrokes. Not true. What we're seeing at the moment is a lot of accusations not rooted in evidence. And so what we're saying to the government here is judge us on the facts. Spend time with us, learn how the platform actually works, and understand what we are doing to keep Australians safe. Data security and privacy is our number one focus. It's what we want, it's what Australians want, and it's ultimately what the government wants. So whether it's Minister Andrews or the Minister Claire O'Neill, we want to have those conversations directly with them and tell them the truth. I think it's tricky to ban something you don't understand.
Okay, you said there's no GPS data collected. The company has admitted that employees within ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, did use data from journalists to try to see if they were being leaked information from people within TikTok or within ByteDance. So if it's not technically GPS data, if it's metadata that tells you where people are, who they're meeting with, isn't that just as intrusive?
Look, in Australia, we have some of the toughest privacy regulations in the world, a fact we're proud of. And we really clearly spell out what we collect and what we don't collect. And in Australia, we don't collect GPS information. We collect either more, like less or in line with industry standards. We're just like all of these other platforms, but we're getting unfairly singled out around this. I think what we really want to get into the conversation is the breadth of social media applications and messaging applications. Don't just single us out.
Okay, so on that case though, which has made huge headlines, since you've discovered that, if indeed that was the first time you discovered that, have you sought clarification that no journalists, government officials, whatever it might be, are being spied on in Australia via the TikTok app?
Absolutely we did. And everyone can feel safe that that is absolutely not the case. Again, we take data security and privacy really seriously. We put strict cybersecurity measures in place to make sure Australians can feel safe and protected on the platform, whether they're users or whether they're journalists. It applies to everyone. And so, again, like I've been in this industry now for 17 years. I've worked for Google and YouTube. I don't see anyone working harder than TikTok to make sure that data security and privacy is in place. Frankly, because of the scrutiny we get, it means we have to work harder than anyone.
So how damaging was this then, the revelation that the data was used to spy on journalists and try to root out their sources?
Well, that happened in the US. It was some US employees looking at US data. I can't speak too directly to that. But what I can tell you is that's absolutely not what the company stands for. And in that case, those employees were fired as soon as it was found out, and even more stringent methods to put in place to make sure that never happens again. I think that's a one-off example, but the broader thing here is everything that TikTok does, more than any other player in the field that I can see, around that cybersecurity, around keeping those Aussies safe.
I mentioned ByteDance, it's the owner of TikTok. Is anyone from the Chinese Communist Party on the board or management of ByteDance?
No, absolutely not. And to be really, really clear, because this comes up a lot, there is no influence, there is no ownership, there's no control from the CCP into ByteDance around that. Like, it's very much a global company. It had its origins in China, but 60% of the company is owned by institutional investors that invest in some of the biggest Western tech companies in the world. 20% is owned by the founders and 20% is owned by staff, including the Aussie team here. We're really clear about the nature that it's a global company, and those protections have to be in place because it's clearly a concern, not just here in Australia, but around the world.
The argument you've made is around this national security law brought in China in 2017 that could force companies to give up data is that, well, we have Australian companies basing data in China as well. Do you see the difference though? I mean, TikTok is a company owned and within China versus an Australian company. If it found out something like that was going on, it can pull its data out. TikTok can't just suddenly not be a Chinese company, can it?
First and foremost, the data isn't held in China. So for Aussies, it's held in the US and Singapore. So the starting point is that the data isn't even within the borders of China. And we do have those protections in place. The data is held in the US and Singapore, strict cybersecurity. I think this is another example where we get singled out. And where there are concerns around any Aussie company that might have Chinese employees, that's not what's getting spoken about. If there are issues around concerns from people, let's have those in the broader conversation. We're doing exactly the same as all others in this industry that have employees in China, and they'll tell you the same thing, that there are strict protections in place and Aussies' data is safe. We do a better job than anyone in this because we've had to.
The premise was not that there's a bit of a difference with a Chinese company versus whether it just be employees there. Let me ask you this though, the process around that law, that national intelligence law, what can you tell us about it? Would you, as Australian CEO of TikTok, be either asked to approve that access, told it was happening, or just never know about it?
Look, I'm not a legal expert, but what I do know is because the data isn't held in China, they'd need to go through international legal requirements. I believe it's called the MLAT Treaty. And that would mean that they'd have to make requests of either the Singaporean or US governments to access that information because that's where the Aussie data is held. I think they'd have a tough time getting access to that, and certainly we would be made aware of it. I can't see that ever happening, and we would never give that information to the Chinese government.
That's assuming, I guess, it's all done above board, but just to follow up on that, have you clarified as the Australian boss of this company with management whether you would be told or asked? Have you asked to be told about it? Would you give your approval? What have you clarified about your role in that?
Look, I'm not going to turn up to these interviews without clarifying that. And we are really clear that we do not, have not, and will not share that information with China. And any access that would be made around that would be made aware to anyone because it would be a significant issue to the trust of Australians and to the trust of government and the media as well. So we're really clear on this. One of the reasons why I'm doing a lot of media, including your show here, Tom, is to put people's mind at ease around those protections that are in place. Again, we have to work really hard at this. Cybersecurity, data privacy, data protections are at the forefront of every single thing we do. We have to work harder than anyone else at this because we get these kind of accusations all the time.
Lee Hunter, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.